Trade in major weapons is big business, more than $30 billion. But what matters more, money or morals? Canada is the latest country in the firing line. Its armoured vehicles are being used by Saudi Arabia, allegedly against civilians. For many countries, the question's the same. Do economic benefits outweigh human rights? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the Canadian government has launched an immediate review into the allegations that its military vehicles sold to Saudi Arabia have been used against civilians. It's reopened the whole debate about the ethics of the arms trade, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is under pressure to suspend the multi-billion-dollar weapons deal with Riyadh. Daniel Lack reports now from Toronto.
Social media feeds from eastern Saudi Arabia have helped spark a controversy in Canada. Some are by activists who oppose the government, others by what appear to be members of the Saudi security forces. In these pictures and videos of conflict in the Al Kataif region, there's an occasional glimpse of what military equipment specialists say are almost certainly Canadian-made Gurkha armoured vehicles. If confirmed, it could be a violation of Canada's defence export policies.
It's kind of forcing the Canadian government to, reconcile the fact that this is a reality when you sell these types of vehicles to a country like Saudi Arabia that's engaging in these internally, repressive actions. That they're going to use them. You give somebody a hammer, they're going to use it.
Canada has expressed concern about the conflict in the mainly Shia eastern province of Saudi Arabia and said it's investigating whether Canadian-made vehicles were involved. Export guidelines say Canadian military equipment can't be sold to places where there's a risk they may be used in human rights abuses. Yet Saudi Arabia, which is often criticized by rights groups, is now the second largest buyer of Canadian arms, behind the U.S.
Very few countries have the so-called democracy or human rights criteria attached to their arms exports. And even if they do, so for example, Sweden, that doesn't automatically mean that they're not going to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia.
A far larger arms deal with Saudi Arabia could be at risk if the government finds that Gurkha vehicles were indeed involved in this conflict. The Canadian arm of the UK-based General Dynamics company has a 10-year, $11 billion contract to sell these armoured vehicles to Riyadh, one that guarantees thousands of well-paying jobs in a city near Toronto. Rights activists and opposition political parties are urging the deal be cancelled.
It is pernicious to argue that Canadian jobs should depend on the export of equipment which is going to be used to perpetrate atrocious abuses of citizens. That cannot be the way that we build our economy.
It's a dilemma for the Canadian government. Does it emphasize the country's belief in international human rights or continue to reap the considerable economic benefits from arms exports to places like Saudi Arabia? Daniel Lack, Al Jazeera, Toronto.
Well, the global trade in heavy arms is now at its highest level since the end of the Cold War. Last year, it was worth around $31 billion. That's a huge number. It's roughly the same as the GDP of the Central African nation Cameroon, for instance. Now, the top three exporters of major weapons for 2016 were the United States at almost $10 billion, followed by Russia, $6.5 billion worth of arms, and Germany came third on the list, selling weapons valued at around $2.8 billion. All right, let's introduce our guests now. In Ottawa, in Canada, we have Stephen Chase, national correspondent for the Globe and Mail newspaper. He's written extensively about Canada's arms exports to Saudi Arabia. In London, Andrew Smith, spokesman for the Campaign Against Arms Trade And in Stockholm, we have Pieter Wezeman, a senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Welcome to you all. Stephen, can I start with you? Because this is, of course, where the controversy is at the moment. This was a deal agreed by the Conservative government of Stephen Harper in 2014, but it's been signed off and okayed by the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau.
Yes, it was actually the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau which approved the exports of approximately, in Canadian dollars, roughly $12 to $15 billion.
And Stephen, how big a deal is this $12 to $15 billion? How big a deal is that for the arms industry of Canada, the overall arms industry in Canada, worth about $500 million, I believe?
Yes, this is the largest advanced manufacturing export contract ever reached by Canada. So it's massive, and it keeps thousands of people employed in southwestern Ontario, an area that has seen manufacturing jobs disappearing over the last couple of decades.
So that is the balance that has to be struck, isn't it, between immediate economic benefits for your home constituency and human rights considerations as to where your weapons are going and how they're being used. That's something that the Canadian government is having to grapple with now.
It is, and also this government in particular has been very assertive about how it's going to play be a force for peace on the world stage. It's boasted of having a feminist foreign policy. It's talked about Canada being back on the world stage as a force for good after a predecessor government. So there are export rules in Canada which say that in this circumstance you should not be exporting weapons to a country with a persistent record of human rights if there's any risk that they will be used to suppress the population, to abuse the population. And the significance of what happened in the end of July in Eastern Province, Saudi Arabia, is that it's the first time we've ever seen video evidence of what appear to be Canadian vehicles, Canadian armoured vehicles, armoured with turrets and weapons, being used to suppress a population.
All right, let's go to Pieter now in Stockholm. Pieter, your organisation, of course, monitors the arms trade, doesn't it? What, in your opinion, is the Canadian government guilty of, if anything, and what action should be taken now?
Canadian government is, if you want to call it, guilty of that what many other governments in the world do, namely to decide to export weapons primarily for economic reasons. Some countries, especially the USA, the UK, claims it too, France to some example too, they claim that a significant part of their arms exports are also related to their direct security needs, their national security needs. But generally it is the case that many states in the world, especially in Europe and especially in North America, export weapons to a very wide variety of states, and there are usually very few exceptions to which states those countries are willing to supply arms. Saudi Arabia is still on the list of possible of being a possible client for arms exports for almost all significant arms-producing countries in the world.
Coming to you, Andrew, in London, because, of course, your organisation was involved directly in a challenge to the British government's plans to export arms, as it happens, to Saudi Arabia again, and you lost the case. The review from the court went against you. They said it was perfectly fine, the judges, that is, said it was perfectly fine for Britain to continue to export its weapons to Saudi Arabia.
Well, our case was specifically in reference to the use of UK arms in the ongoing bombardment of Yemen. We disagree with the judgment which was made and we are appealing it. We believe that if this judgment is upheld, then it's going to be regarded as a green light for the UK and other governments as well to continue arming and supporting some of the most brutal, oppressive regimes in the world, and none more so than Saudi Arabia, which has got an appalling human rights record, both in how it treats Saudi people at home and how it has acted internationally.
Sorry to interrupt, but as Pieter was pointing out, Saudi Arabia has not been blacklisted. It's not on any list of undesirables to which major exporting countries should not do business with. So countries sending their weapons, their exports to Saudi Arabia, they're not breaching any particular laws or conventions, are they?
Well, we believe that the UK exports have been in breach of UK arms export criteria, which, like Canadian criteria, does say very clearly that if there's a clear risk that arms might be used in a serious violation of international humanitarian law, then an export should not go ahead. Now, we believe that should end arms exports to Saudi Arabia, and that is exactly why we challenged it. If Saudi Arabia is not on a country's blacklist, then it absolutely should be, because this is a regime which has one of the most appalling human rights records in the world, and for 2 years now has been inflicting a brutal bombardment on the people of Yemen.
Indeed. All right. Stephen, coming back to you, it seems very much as though the problem of arms deals and selling weapons to various countries around the world, the problem arises because the definition of risk and human rights abuses comes down to judgment. It comes down to interpretation. There doesn't seem to be a hard and fast definition as to what is acceptable and what isn't.
No, there is obviously going to be a range of opinions on that, but what the government said, the rules say in the book, on the books, is that if there should not be any substantial risk of human rights violations. And so the question is what is the risk that the Saudis are going to use this against their population in the case of the armored vehicles? And there has been for years video evidence, especially going back to the beginning of Arab Spring, of them using armored vehicles against their own citizens. So there's a record there which suggests a proclivity and a propensity to use those weapons. And what's happened and what's different about now in July 2017 is it's Canadian vehicles. So the risk has gone up. The question of whether this is an abuse of the weapons is, you're right, there's certainly a spectrum of interpretation.
And Pieter, now there is something called the Arms Trade Treaty. I mean, that's a UN law, effectively. It's international law, isn't it? It was adopted in 2014. 92 states signed up to it. There have been 89 ratifications. Doesn't seem to be working, though, does it?
It works to some extent, but it doesn't work the way you might expect it. As you said before, states under the ATT, those states which have signed up and ratified the Arms Trade Treaty have basically said, okay, we will have export control regulations, export control system. We will have a system in which there will be a assessment every time weapons are going to be exported from our country. And we're going to check if we want to do that or not every time that happens. But as it has already been said, each country has its own right to basically interpret those guidelines which are given by the ATT and to then decide in their own way when they think that there are certain risks or not. And so you see a great diversity in how states do react to that and how states have established their arms export control regulations and how they make decisions. For example, in the case of Saudi Arabia, I mentioned that many states either do sell or want to sell to Saudi Arabia as a very big arms market, but there are states which are more restrictive. There's even one state which has indicated that it has a de facto arms embargo, a national arms embargo, and it is the Netherlands, which has said we're not going to supply for now weapons to Saudi Arabia which could be used in Yemen because we are very, very concerned about that. So a country can take that decision. However, immediately you have to add that in that particular case, the Netherlands, the stakes in economic terms are not very high. There was no $10 billion deal ongoing at the time that decision was taken. So the ATT work, well, not the way you think it would. It's only one step into a international system in which there's more scrutiny and states hopefully become more careful in their arms exports.
So, Andrew, I'm guessing that you would agree with Pieter, and when it comes to the way Britain manages its arms export industry, which is enormous, isn't it? I'm guessing that you would accuse them of placing profit way above any human rights considerations.
Well, absolutely. Profit has been the driving consideration. Regarding the Arms Trade Treaty, I think there are significant problems with the treaty itself. There aren't particularly strong mechanisms for enforcement, and much of it is actually very vague. But this was always going to be the problem of when negotiating a treaty with some of the world's biggest arms-dealing countries signing up to it as well. It was always going to get diluted in that way. In terms of the UK government, we have to factor in that at present, roughly 2/3 of UK arms exports are going to the Middle East. They're going to dictatorships, they're going to human rights abusers. We don't know how these weapons will be used, we don't know who they're going to be used against, and there's no such thing as arms control once weapons have left our shores and entered a war zone.
And this is exactly the position, then, that the Canadian government now finds itself in, isn't it, Stephen, insofar as there's a deal that was agreed by a prior government, but is now going through, and it seems to be so beneficial economically that Justin Trudeau and his Liberals, who want to make the world a better place, are certainly having pause, aren't they, before they decide to pull out of this deal. He's even used words like not wanting Canada to be seen as a banana republic.
Yes, the government, and I should be clear, the Trudeau government bears significant responsibility for this because they made the decision that there was no risk of the Saudis using the weapons against their own civilians. They weren't just handcuffed to the previous government's decision. But they are in a dilemma right now, and this dilemma has actually broken out in public. The advisor to the former Foreign Affairs Minister wrote a piece in the paper saying that Saudi has basically bought the silence of the West through lucrative arms contracts. That was Jocelyn Coulon. And the Saudis, while they wouldn't agree with that wording, have also come out in public and basically kind of intimated the same thing. The Saudi ambassador to Canada said to the Canadian people, look, we had other options. We could have bought these weapons from somewhere else, but we bought them from you as a gesture of friendship. So the Saudis are saying, you should be grateful we gave you these arms, this arms deal. We didn't need to, and we did it because we want you as our friends. So in a way that the Trudeau government is wrestling with the fact that the Saudis have effectively, bought our silence.
And Pieter, so far we've just been talking about governments, haven't we? Government to government transactions. But what about non-state actors? Because, of course, there's a huge black market, isn't there, in weapons sales, which is why so many of the world's conflicts, civil conflicts in particular, are being fed constantly almost by illicit weapons and an illicit trade.
I think it's important to talk about that, but before doing that, I want to stress that by far the largest part of the arms trade is actually weapons being supplied from states to other states. That is the bulk of it. And in this particular case, it is really about how these states abuse those weapons for activities, for actions which are potentially or often enough also clearly breaches of international human rights and international humanitarian law. Having said that, yes, it is true that there is also a significant amount of, let's say, illegal is not necessarily the right word because it's not clear which law would apply to which particular action, but at least covert and illicit type of arms transfers, as we of course also see in the Middle East itself, which by itself then leads to a whole range of tensions between states. And despite the fact that these are weapons which are going to non-state actors, rebel groups or terrorists or whatever you want to call them, but often there are then again states involved. In those cases where these covert deals really have an impact on conflict, very often it is the case that there are states involved. And in the case of the Middle East, we see how several states, including Saudi Arabia, including the UAE, including Qatar, have all been kind of involved in acquiring weapons from other countries in the world, which they then have used to supply those to rebel forces in Syria, Libya, Yemen, for example, or state forces in that case too. So they have used this kind of covert military aid as a way to create greater influence for their own state in the region.
So, Andrew, I'm just wondering then whether it's an impossible dream then to expect that human rights considerations can be taken into account when dealing with such a large and hugely profitable, lucrative area of industry.
Well, we would certainly hope not, and we know that certainly in the UK, public opinion is on our side. All the polling suggests that about 2/3 of the country is against arms exports to human rights abusers, with only about 10% being in favour and the rest being undecided. Now, we have no reason to doubt that the figures would be similar in other countries around Europe and in Canada and other arms exporting countries. But of course, the arms trade is a very powerful industry. We see that with the huge amounts of money it spends on lobbying government. And none of this would be possible without the full fundamental support of government. It's governments that sign off on contracts. It's governments that rubber stamp everything that goes through. But actually, certainly in the UK next month, we're seeing the DSEI Arms Fair, which is one of the biggest arms fairs in the world, will bring a lot of world's worst dictators and a lot of world's biggest arms companies to London. There'll be thousands of people protesting outside it, trying to shut it down. We need to mobilise public opinion. And through doing that, we can hopefully build a better, more peaceful world.
All right, and Stephen, coming back to you, how big an issue, how big a difficulty is this particular incident of arms sales to Saudi Arabia as it happens? How big an incident is this for the Trudeau government, and how are they likely to react? We understand that there is now an investigation underway. Is there much public pressure on the government to reverse its decision?
Yeah, one of this government is sort of a centrist government, and they have to worry about their left flank. The reason they get elected is because they get a significant amount of the center-left votes in Canada, and they've got a New Democratic Party on the left that will take those votes. Thank you very much if there's an opportunity. So it does threaten their political base to be seen doing nothing in this case. They are taking this particular incidents more seriously than they have over the last 18 months. When there was a debate, but not a specific smoking gun, so to speak. What they're going to do in this case, I cannot predict, but they are showing every sign of being more seriously concerned about it than they ever have. They're talking about having gone to the Saudis and prodded them on this matter. They're talking about they took it to their European allies. They're obviously they're raising a much bigger ruckus than they ever have before about it, and they have to worry about their image for voters with this. And as like one of our colleagues said on the air here, the polls are certainly in favor of restricting exports to Saudi Arabia.
Pieter, we've spent a great deal of this programme talking specifically about the Canadian government's deal with the government of Saudi Arabia. But as Andrew has been reminding us, the British government, all of the major arms exporting countries are involved in deals which can involve nefarious, not necessarily nefarious governments, but governments that carry out nefarious acts. Where does the burden of responsibility lie, with the exporter or with the government that buys the weapons and then uses those weapons against its own people?
Both. It is very clear that the country that imports the arms should take action to prevent that those arms are used in contravention of international law. That's very clear. They have to do that. Also, when they produce those weapons themselves, they are responsible for their own actions. But every state which has an export control regime, and especially every state which has signed up to the Arms Trade Treaty, and as you said before, by now that's about 92, all those states have the responsibility to ensure that they make a thorough risk assessment in which they take into account whether or not the recipient state may use those weapons in contravention of international humanitarian or human rights law. That is their obligation. They have signed up to that. So it's very clear that they have that responsibility.
Can I thank you all at this point? Pieter Wezeman in Stockholm, Andrew Smith in London, and Stephen Chase in Ottawa. Thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, our handle @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis from the whole team here in Doha. It's bye for now.